Hello, wonderful viewers, and my amazing guest tonight, who I'm very excited to have. We'll be going to have our wonderful project Hopepunk. Hopepunk's joining us throughout the whole stream. If anyone who's watching wants to invite other people, please do let them know that we're broadcasting, because tonight I'm so excited to have as my guest the incredible comedian and all-round powerhouse of a woman. It is JoJo Sutherland. JoJo, thank you so much for being here.
It's so lovely to see you, my darling. I might look at me with a cup of tea, like pretending to be someone else. No, this is lovely, and we haven't chatted for so long, and it's just lovely to see your face and to catch up.
It's really lovely to see you too, because I have been working with you for so many years, but the last couple of years, for some reason that we might talk about later on, begins with a P or a C, depending on which word you want to use. We haven't seen each other, but for everybody out there who's watching, and we might have to put this in the chat as well at some point in our Discord chat, how do you and I know each other, JoJo? How would you sum it up?
Do you know what? I was trying to think about the very first time we met, and my first real proper memory is sitting in a bar with you and Lizzie, and we talked, Lizzie Mace, yes, and we were talking, I was giving you advice about how to get into comedy.
I remember that. I fell in love with you, and
your optimism and your enthusiasm and your ideas and your creativity, and you were just a little ball of fire with so many great, and I mean, you were brilliant. You and Lizzie were doing a show, you were fantastic, and I just thought, oh, I like this girl.
It's not even subtle, but I can see my cheeks going pinker and pinker. That optimism that you mentioned is why we're doing this Hopepunk project, but the optimism has been tested in the last couple of years. We'll talk about that later on. JoJo, I remember mainly my favourite memories of you are you came to my 30th birthday party when I moved to Edinburgh. I lived nearly 4 years in Edinburgh, and you were one of the first people that was like, "Hey, JoJo, I've moved to Edinburgh. Do you want to hang out?" Which we did repeatedly. And you directed 2 of my shows, I think.
When I grew up.
Yeah, first solo show, and then Look at Me. Hang on, Look at Me is there. There you go. That poster behind me. And yeah, you have always been an incredible supporter of me, and you've been yourself working as a comedian for how many years now?
Well, 20. That doesn't seem right, does it? It feels like a fortnight. But yeah, in fact, December this year, December 2001, December 2001 was my very first gig at an open mic. I'd done a comedy course and did a 10-week course, and then at the end of it did 5 minutes to not even poor unsuspecting public. It was friends and family. So December 2001 was my very first gig, and yeah, so next year will be my 21st anniversary.
Well, happy anniversary. And I feel like we should go out and celebrate your comedy career coming of age in America. We're going to say a very warm welcome to our lovely viewers as well. We've got some lovely people, such as Susanna, the amazing producer of the show Hopepunk, and Rick Carranza. Hey, Rick Carranza, fellow comedian.
Hey,
also an Edinburghian contact that we made friends up there, and hello to everybody else as well. Thank you so much for being here. I really love to have you. Just for anyone who hasn't seen us do any streams before, these series of interviews are a part of a project called Hopepunk, and it's Arts Council funded. And as JoJo knows, I applied for Arts Council funding for this project earlier this year. And then earlier in the summer, pretty much the week that we received the news that we got the funding for the research and development for this show, I had a bit of a meltdown, and I'm using the word meltdown rather than breakdown because I don't like the word breakdown. I don't know why I think meltdown is any better. I'm gonna need to find a new name for that moment, but It was the beginning of really difficult times, but also the most transformative times that I've ever lived through. And as part of this show, we are exploring, well, we were originally going to be exploring the nature of hope, but that has taken a twist that I had no idea, I did not see coming, which was that I questioned the very nature of hope and the usefulness of hope. And we're talking about trauma as well as part of this research for this show. I'm sorry, breaking news. Rick Kranzer is moving back to Edinburgh.
Yay!
Rick, can't wait to come up and see you when you're back up there, and maybe we can get us three going for a drink at some point.
It's Hotel California, Edinburgh, isn't it? You try to leave, but you can't. You keep coming back.
It is a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful place, and felt like home for a long time. So yes, JoJo, you have just today finished a tour. Let's just celebrate that for a second before we start talking about your
not my very own tour, but been supporting Jonathan Pye, who's the fake spoof newscaster that went viral and is now selling out theatres across the country and has been amazing. So I've been his tour support before the pandemic, and then this one that was rescheduled 4 times. And it's just been a roller coaster. It's been emotional, but it's been fantastic. Going from the 18 months of whatever the fucking hell that was to being back out in the road and entertaining audiences. My battery's feeling quite filled with life again. So I'm feeling quite buoyant, but exhausted and maybe a little bit hungover.
Oh no, no! Which is why you're on the tea maybe tonight potentially.
Maybe that's what it is.
We are going to talk about the pandemic later on, because part of why I wanted to create a show about, or research a show and develop a show about trauma recovery, was that the pandemic has been a societal trauma for all of us, no matter what experience we had during it. And I will later on want to talk to you about comedy and the effect of what that means for people in industries like comedy or the arts, where everything was ripped away from us. But we're going to firstly touch on your past, because your comedy, the first time I saw you do comedy, you talked about a bunch of traumas in a very short space of time, and you made everyone laugh, put everyone at ease. I would love to, if we can, we're going to do a trauma graph, but it's going to be in our minds. So trauma graphs, for anyone who doesn't know, I hope none of you know. I hope none of you have had to do one. But it was the first thing that I did in my therapy when we identified that I had complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is sort of from childhood, pervasive, ongoing, difficult experiences that become part of your formative years. So your brain develops in a certain way. And we plotted on this graph where the vertical axis is the level of trauma, so like from 1 to 10, depending on like how much pain you experienced. And then on the horizontal axis, that's your age. And then you plot and identify with little crosses where each of the things that you think was quite a difficult thing to go through happened. And what it's meant to do is help you identify certain ages where maybe a cluster of difficult experiences happened all at once, and maybe that might lead to some repressed memories around that time. Now, JoJo.
Well, I used to do this bit, I don't know if you remember, sort of introducing my traumas, but quite glibly and flippantly, but it was to kind of warn the audience, if you like. But when I was talking about because I had a brain hemorrhage, I would tell the audience, I had a brain hemorrhage, spoiler alert, I survived. At that time, I was a single parent with 3 kids, having just got divorced, had my house repossessed and on the verge of bankruptcy. And I thought, fuck it, comedy. So I talk about my previous marriage that was being married to an alcoholic who was violent, and that then I subsequently went on to marry his brother, which might have been something to do with the brain hemorrhage. I don't know. It wasn't. I very much loved my second husband, although we are now separated. And yes, so it was kind of trying to make the audience feel at ease that all this shit had happened, but there I was on stage laughing about it and not taking it seriously, because all of those things that have happened at various stages of my life I've had to take seriously at the time, but it's been the humor that I've used to counter it that has got me through it. So if that makes sense, do you know what I mean? So
it does.
It took a long time, I have to say, to do material or joke about being, you know, a victim of domestic violence. That was, although you don't say victim now, you say survivor, and I just don't understand what difference the words make. But you know, if they make people feel better, I was definitely a fucking victim. So
language is there to be used to empower people. So if you find that word fits you, then that's empowering, right? So
I think so. But yeah, I was surprised at how long it did. Well, not surprised at how long it did take, but when I did eventually, because I did a show about it. Not the whole thing wasn't an hour of domestic violence. Jesus Christ, you couldn't sell tickets to that. But
we're trying to do that for an hour about trauma. So let's see how we go.
Repeatedly talking about being punched in the face. But, you know, when I did joke about it, do you know what I mean? It was that thing of, you know, I didn't know I was marrying an alcoholic wife beater. It's not like I walked down the aisle to the theme tune from Rocky, you know, which is that kind of. But when you do, it's kind of, again, surrounding things now, it's quite interesting. We talk about consent. It becomes quite rightly a big issue. But I remember when I wanted to do the show and I thought, oh God, it's not just my story, is it? So it's my kids' story and it's other people who are involved with me story. And as much as it happened to me, it only seemed fair to ask the permission of others around me to talk about it. And they were so cool, which I think the fact that I had their blessing to go and basically, you know, open the can of worms that was their father was cathartic for me and for them. But most importantly, doing that show in a good way, I kind of, you realize just how many people are in that situation. And it's Vladimir McTavish, who some of you may or may not know, used to have a brilliant joke about it, saying that domestic violence is a bit like voting Tory. We know people do it, but they just don't admit to it. So we know people do it in their millions. And it is like that. And so every show I did, I mean, queues of women coming up to me afterwards and going, oh my God, this had happened to them, this has happened to them. And you kind of go, because you do think you're the only person that's been through that situation. I mean, I recognized quite quickly I wasn't, but you do think you're the only one that's going through it. And that's why you don't tell people, because you feel stupid for not, you know, for allowing it to happen, because that's your brain process. You think, oh, well, you know, if I tidied the kitchen properly, then he wouldn't have got so upset. You know, I mean, it's madness, but you go into a sense of denial, you go into a sense of shame, you go into a sense of taking responsibility, thinking that if you can change your ways, then you can stop it from happening, when in fact, he's the cunt. So
there may be swearing in the stream and we're absolutely fucking.
Oh yeah, I hope nobody's, in Scotland, cunt's a term of endearment, get used to it.
It is. And
maybe.
There's a couple of things that you touched on there, JoJo, that I'm kind of slightly skipping ahead, but I think it's important to weave it through, because firstly, you mentioned about, you know, the first jokes that you tell on stage and to put the audience at ease. There's also the kind of the pacing, you know, like you don't begin the routine talking about the domestic violence. You begin about the brain hemorrhage. And I guess
fluffy.
yeah, light and fluffy stuff, brain hemorrhages. But I guess there's a couple of things there that I think is really important, and I'd like to ask you about, is sort of that process of when you of easing an audience in, because something like a brain hemorrhage, you know, it's traumatic, it's horrific, but anyone can kind of say, well, I guess that could happen to me. I have some experience of physical illness or physical injuries, therefore there's a pathway in. Something like domestic violence that is by its very nature, you know, but for the grace of God, and one hopes to never have that experience. It's I guess what I'm likening it to is that when I first started doing my solo shows, I had a little plan of when I would come out about each of my different experiences with my mental health. Yeah. So the first show, When I Grew Up, which you directed, I sort of 40 minutes into the show, having done all this laughs, well, wasn't as stand-up comedy, it was more storytelling. But 40 minutes into the show, I was then open about my anorexia, my compulsive overeating disorder, which is now named binge eating disorder, and being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And then in my next show, Look at Me, which again you directed, I sort of started to say that stuff about 10 minutes into the show, into a 50-minute, hour. And let's face it, JoJo, I always overran, so it was never an hour. But then 40 minutes into the show, it was more like I still struggle with these things. It's not this neat, happy thing that's been tied up and a narrative that's over and I'm not better. That's not how it works. Then the next show that I did was Decision Time, which was about it was on the face of it about a proposal of marriage that I didn't know whether I wanted to say yes or no to. Top tip, if you're not sure if you want to say yes or no, don't do a show about it. Please don't do that, because we got engaged and then that ended as well. But then the next show was, that show had within it honesty about suicide ideation, and then the next show was the show that was about was about kindness, but then it opened up about my hallucinations that I experienced when I was sectioned, and each time it was this step of how open am I going to be. And I'm interested because you do that in a much shorter space of time, which I've never really been brave enough yet to do, but I'm getting there. And then you also mentioned about consent. So I wanted to ask you about pacing with audiences and how you do that with these multiple traumas, but then how you pace it for yourself and also pace it for those that are involved in your story, because the more the work that I'm doing on myself at the moment, the more I'm discovering that there are blurred boundaries of whose story is it that I am telling here now. So
absolutely.
Well, I haven't posed a specific, as a bad journalist but good friend, what specific question am I asking you? It's the pacing. How do you pace it for the audience, for yourself as well, over the course of a comedy set or a show, or the number of years that you're working on this?
It's the classic sort of comedy read the room, and for ages, the thing about domestic violence, like I say, that was sort of later on in my career that I went into that. So I think you do, like you say, you sort of you dip your toe in, you drop some things about the health thing with the brain hemorrhage. Audiences are fine with that because they're just a bit sort of wide-eyed, going, oh my God, you had a brain hemorrhage and you survived, and it's all kind of oh, well done you. Whereas if you're talking about domestic violence, that's the recognition in comedy where people do feel, oh God, you've triggered something in me, or it's a memory, or so you're dealing with different emotions depending on what subject you're talking about, and so you need to be understanding of who you're telling and when you're telling it to. And I genuinely wanted to be able to do the domestic violence stuff in a club on a Saturday night full of stags and heads. That was my aim. So it started off me talking about it in an hour-long show, that it was, you knew what you were coming to see essentially, and that it would touch on difficult subjects. But when you're in a club setting where, you're just, a name on the bill, people don't necessarily know what they're getting when they turn up the stand or the Glee or the store. And that was my aim, was to kind of go, can I pop this in to a 20-minute set that is just jokes, do you know what I mean? About other things, just bringing up kids, being married, the cat going missing, or, can I drop something like domestic violence into it And I did, and I did that for quite, and it was a really good feeling to kind of on a Saturday night go, oh yeah, jokes about being punched in the face are funny to stags.
Do you know, it's really interesting because I did a gig earlier this year where it was booked for a mental health festival, and I went in being like, all right, I've got some new material. Well, it's not new material. I tested it out at comedy clubs, and it went down really, really well because it was like a material that was about politics or stuff, but hidden in there was the kind of, I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act, and I went from a size 4 to a size 20 in 6 months, and all of that. But I learned that if it's a mental health festival, don't start a routine about politics. Like, they're there for mental health material.
I have to say though, one of the worst gigs I had talking about doing the sort of routine about domestic violence was at a Women's Aid charity gig. And in that way you went, are you shitting me? The very people that should understand. But I think it was maybe, I don't know if it was too close to the bone, or it was, do you mean that they were a Women's Aid charity that didn't want to be reminded, or a terrible lot of do-gooders that hadn't actually suffered and thought, oh no, don't talk about it. Do you know what I mean? But I don't know what it was. I don't know what it was, but it pissed me off is what it did. I was like, there's one place I should be able to talk about my experience of, domestic violence. It's, with Women's Aid.
So, okay, I've got a couple of questions that I'm noting down, but you just gave me an excellent segue. So I'm going to follow it. You said that you were really pissed off, and I remember the first time that I worked with you, one of the first times that we had a session together. And when I say session, it was not with alcohol, but it was that was later on. That was after we finished work. You asked me. You said to me, comedy's about what makes you angry. What makes you angry, Julia? And at the time, back in 2013, I said, oh, I don't believe in anger. I'm not an angry person. Holding on to anger is like holding on to hot coals, expecting somebody else to get hurt. Turns out I was massively wrong, JoJo. And you were right. I was repressing all my anger, and that wasn't healthy. And part of my trauma recovery that I've been going through and the therapy I've been doing is gently, because you can't just suddenly access huge emotions that you're terrified of without being within a window of tolerance. And it's instead came out sideways. When I got close to people, it would come out sideways, and it wouldn't be about the thing that it was about originally.
Absolutely, deflection.
Exactly. But I didn't have any idea. I didn't realize there's anything about transference or emotional flashbacks. But firstly, I want to thank you, because you were ahead of the game that I was playing at the time. And I guess what I want to ask you is a bit more about that quote that you told me. Comedy is about what makes people angry, what makes you angry. I want to ask why that is, and how comedy can give voice to anger. And I also want to ask you about your personal traumas, and how, like, what is it that you were angry about that you're able to use comedy to give voice to?
Well, it's a combination of anger and fear, actually. So sometimes when I teach comedy workshops, it's that thing, I do that exercise of what do you love, what do you hate, and what are you scared of? And, that sort of fear and anger are those emotions that we do suppress. They're also the things that we have the least control over. Do you know what I mean? We can get really angry about things that, don't necessarily deserve that kind of animosity towards it. And things particularly that you're scared of, those are the things that are very controlling, because usually the things we're scared of are things that are out with our control. So whether it's fear of dying, or, fear of spiders, or, scared of flying, or, any death, all these kind of things, that when you then use humor to counteract the fear or the anger, it loses its power. It loses its hold over you, because then you're not subsumed with this kind of, pent up aggression or fear. And fear is such a devastating emotion, which has, again, we'll talk about it, but the last 18 months, that's been you know, COVID's here, fear is up here. Fear has absolutely consumed everyone, from whatever your beliefs or whatever your experience of the last 18 months, fear's been at the core of it. And from fear comes anger, because it's that lack of the control, it's that vulnerability, it's not being able to hold on to something, it's not feeling safe. And when you don't feel safe, you lash out. But when you laugh, then it grounds you. I just feel it keeps your feet back on the ground.
Physiologically, it also helps you breathe. Like your diaphragm is moving. It gives you a lovely little massage internally, which we all need sometimes. Yeah. And it helps.
Endorphins.
Absolutely. So with your traumas that we've touched on so far, because they're not the only traumas that we're going to talk about today.
Those are baby ones.
Those are the old ones. So like we got
those
used to
old things. Those old things. I've dealt with them a long time ago. That's
what I love. That's why, like, I was like, this is my woman. This is my mummy. This is my substitute mummy, because I feel like you're my sister as well. It's like this weird, beautiful found family thing. Because for you, you're like brain hemorrhage. That's nothing. And me, it's like, being sectioned under the Mental Health Act for anorexia. That's nothing. I've got so many jokes about that. Let's just move on.
I tell you what I feel quite guilty about when I always think, well, I don't feel guilty about it because it was a brilliant thing to do. But when in the show, when we discovered Tanya, and I said, what is the voice in your head? What does she sound like? I want to hear what she's saying to you. And then I made you record. I look back now and I go, I think I nearly had that poor girl sectioned again, making me listen to Tanya every day. I was like, I want to hear, give her a name, and I want to hear her.
It was a stroke of genius. And for anyone who hasn't seen the show, it was this show, Look at Me, where, part of it was that I remember sitting with you and Janie Godley in Joseph Pearce's bar in Edinburgh, great bar, highly recommend it. They do pints of Bloody Marys, they're wonderful. We were chatting about this voice in my head that I was like, well, everyone's got an inner critic, haven't they? Like, everyone's got one. And mine's just really like, she's a real bully, like she's really strong and she's really loud. And you were like, yeah, I want to hear what she has to say. And so I started writing down some things that she said, and then we recorded her. And then in the show, she was played in intermittently throughout the show to interrupt the show, to tell me that I wasn't good enough and things weren't going well enough. And it was a great idea. But I do remember that.
I tipped you over the edge, love.
It was but looking back now, given what's happened recently and the things that I've been dealing with, like, honestly, actually, firstly, Tanya isn't a woman. Tanya's stemming from something else in my childhood that was not a woman. I can't remember whether it was you or Janie who was like, we need to give her a name, a name that sounds like a swear word. Tanya.
Yeah.
And I've met some very nice Tanyas since then. So I feel it's really difficult to meet a Tanya and be like, oh, I know someone who's got the same name as you. And then you also, I think it was Janie who said, but we were all there. Janie said, I don't think everyone has an inner critic. I don't think everyone has a bully in their head. I mean, I don't. And I was sitting there like, what alien are you? Like, you don't walk around with this constant critic just telling you that you're not good enough. Wow, what an amazing life. But yes, Jojo, your traumas, your baby traumas that we've touched on so far, those, when you talk about anger, what is the anger that you were feeling about the brain hemorrhage? What was the anger that you felt about the domestic violence? It might seem like an obvious question, but I want to hear from you. What is the anger that your comedy helps you access with that?
I think, again, going sort of back again, because just to complicate everything, because I did grow up in a castle and my parents, they weren't wealthy, but they were aristocratic. And so I sort of, for the first sort of 12, 13 years of my life, genuinely thought I was going to inherit or marry well, and didn't have any idea that anything awful would happen in my life, because why would it? I was a princess. And so that's the sort of start of it, I think. The frustration. My dad got disinherited, and, we moved overnight from a castle into a caravan with no warning whatsoever. I mean, in itself, it is it's quite the tale. And in fact, I met Stanley Kubrick's daughter the other night, and she was like, "Get that written." So that's all very exciting. But so there was always a sort of frustration around me that was kind of going, "Oh, my life didn't quite go the way that I thought it would." And an acceptance of that. But for years, kind of, sort of my late teens, going, watching all my friends that hadn't been disinherited, you kind of go, "Oh, my life isn't going quite the way I thought it was, or my expectation of it," sort of mentally sort of starting at the top and steadily working my way down. And then, so just a series of, whether it was feeling sorry for myself, just going, "Woe is me, it's not fair. Why haven't I, why can't I afford this? Why can't I afford that?" And then having that sort of slightly poor me situation, and then getting married, to get in domestic violence. And then it was that it felt like the world was deliberately picking on me. It was like, I haven't done anything wrong. So I wasn't taking responsibility in some respects. My parents died when I was quite young. I was 23 when my mum died. I was 29 when my dad died. And and then you just go, right, well, this is fucking it, isn't it? And so the joke I made when I had the brain hemorrhage about, at that time, I was a single parent with 3 kids, having just got divorced, on income support and, on the verge of bankruptcy and house repossessed. It felt like, yeah, fuck it. Do you know what I mean? But the brain hemorrhage was the thing. It was like, of course I'd have a brain hemorrhage. Of course I'd fucking have a brain hemorrhage. But what the brain hemorrhage did do was completely recalibrate the way I viewed life, in as much as, you think you're immortal, you do feel sorry for yourself. But when you literally stare down the barrel of the end of your life, and it was that touch and go, when you recover from something like that, you suddenly go, "Oh, shit, I'm alive." And that is more precious than anything. So everything what was important, what was number one of, I want to be rich, or, I want to live in a fantastic house, or I want a really great job. Why have I got such a shitty car? They all just tumbled down the top 10 lists of requirements in my life. And that you just think, well, fuck, this isn't a dress rehearsal. This literally is it. And so the first 6 months after I was recovering from the brain hemorrhage, I was thinking, I don't want to put anything poisonous. I wasn't smoking. I wasn't drinking. I was eating really healthily. And then I got to about 7 months after surviving a brain hemorrhage and thought, well, hey, I'm alive, and smoke and drink and literally mentally don't waste a second. I mean, I live like there is no tomorrow, which is incredibly reckless, but equally, I kind of go, well, I'm already, 20 odd years over my sell-by date.
Well, I guess that actually links to something I was going to ask you about earlier, because you mentioned earlier about reading the room, classic comedy term, read the room. And I'm wondering about how we can read the room internally, like what we're comfortable with performing or saying, what boundaries are we putting in place with the audience, and how do we as comedians check in with ourselves, having been through, that you've mentioned some childhood traumas there as well that you went through during really formative years. How do you consciously check in with yourself of what am I comfortable sharing and how am I comfortable sharing it?
That's a really good thing, actually, because again, this last 18 months and, everybody's done a bit of self-reflection, and, I after the brain hemorrhage and, other things that have happened that we'll touch on, I really did think, oh my God, I've got through all this. And, my career was absolutely, just at the top of a roller coaster, and things were looking brilliant, and the pandemic hit. And so a whole various other things came out of that. But because, when you do sort of have this sort of life, looking with life just going, oh, fuck, I nearly died, that you can go to the other extreme. And so I've recognized that it's quite easy to me to be quite flippant and quite glib. And I've really learned in some ways to be much more sympathetic towards other people, or in terms of, oh, how's the best way to describe it? I think sometimes when somebody says, oh, you know, I've had a bad day, and I go, oh, fuck off. Do you know what I mean? Is that all? But that's awful, because just because I've been through so much doesn't take away from other people's own misfortunes or unhappiness or anxiety or depression. And it's about reading the room, just going, you know, I can't, thank God lots of people, sometimes I think people should go through trauma. I go, yeah, you know, you've not had enough trauma. You need a little bit more to make you more human. But equally, it's about being more sympathetic and understand, you know, trying to make life easier for everybody rather than harder, you know. And I've changed my sort of mindset of going, oh, well, you haven't had it as hard as me, which is awful. And therefore you've got nothing to complain about. And that's a very shitty way to look at the world.
Well, there's, so I love you so much, because I feel like there's about 5 hours worth, not 5 hours, 5 years worth of conversations we're going to be able to have. But I think there's something about the idea that recognizing that for some people, they might not be able to access the deep grief and sadness about something else. I don't know whether it's their childhood or whether it's their difficult relationship with their parents, or so if they had a bad day at work and that's what they're able to focus on, of that's why they're unhappy, that's why they're feeling these feelings, then it's not to question the level of grief or sadness or difficult feelings. It's they could be feeling it for any reason. And I'm linking that in my little head to when I go into therapy now, and in the last few months, I've stopped saying that, you know, I feel so fat. I feel so fat today. Firstly, because it was never about that anyway, and I knew that. But my therapist started asking me, like, are you saying that because it's easier to blame your body than to sit with to sit with the feelings that you might have about other people from your past, you know? And I also think that this idea of, like, there's a danger, I think, with something like trauma, where there's almost like a competitive thing of, well,
absolutely, yeah.
And I don't want to live in a world like that, where it's like, oh, you have to have the most mental health conditions, like, oh, you've got 12, well, I've got 15, because that's not a healthy way to live. And if you're let's heal from them. And I think I spent way too many years just telling the narrative of my life rather than actually trying to heal. And that's what I'm trying to do now, which is why I've taken a step away from social media and all of that. And that's what I wanted to touch on next, was the narrative thing. So comedy, I as with all stories, you know, comedy is very short storytelling, right? It can be a one-liner story. But it's with a twist always, and that's the nature of it. But I'm aware now that telling a narrative for public consumption about something that is difficult can distance you from feeling the feelings that you actually need to feel, either about something that you repressed those feelings about from years ago, or about something that's going on now. Like learning how to sit with difficult feelings rather than distance yourself from those difficult feelings is what's the phrase, that you have to go through it rather than go through it.
And also interesting you're saying about social media, because, you know, sometimes, you know, comedy is such a great tool to deal with trauma and to, you know, to lessen its impact, or to find a way of dealing with it better. But also it can be counterproductive, in as much as if you're too glib and which I know I am, that you don't necessarily deal with it, and you kind of just have a flippancy about it. But the other thing I had noticed with social media, and particularly again over the last 18 months, is that sharing, you know, it's good to talk, it's okay to not be okay, but we've got ourselves all into this way where we tell everybody, but everybody's telling everybody how awful they feel. It gets this competitive, well, oh, you think you've got it bad, you know. And actually, there's nothing like reading about somebody else's mental health to really fuck with my mental health.
Yeah.
And so it's like, but then equally you go, well, you don't want to say shut the fuck up, because that's healing that person. But social media is so vast that we shouldn't ever know that much about that many people on a daily basis. You know, before social media, you'd only really know little bits and you know, you wouldn't know what was going on in someone's life until you actually were physically in a room with them or on the phone. Whereas now I could tell you what's happening in about 300 people's lives today because I've scrolled through Twitter and Facebook, and that isn't healthy. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, it isn't healthy. And I also I've started to question, having written all these articles about my mental health, I question whether it is healing to be too open. Because again, it's part of that, can be just telling a narrative to distance yourself from actually doing the hard work. And we spoke about this before we came on air, because we're in a studio, clearly not my bedroom. And I've come up to this idea with now, like we created this a show about Hopepunk because I used to think I was very hopeful, and I thought it was an act of rebellion against the dark thoughts in my head. It's very punk to keep going and to keep hoping. But the more work I've done on myself and the more I've researched into this show, the more I've been thinking that hope is kind of false, and like hope isn't a solution, hope isn't a strategy. Hope can just be avoiding responsibility. Like I can hope to catch the bus. I've got to leave the house. Have I left the house? Have I put my shoes on? Don't just hope that I'm going to catch the bus. Do something about it. And it's all
I'd said to you earlier about that. The film with John Cleese with Clockwise, do you know what I mean? And that fabulous line in that is, you know, I can cope with despair. It's the hope I can't stand. And hope is such a, how long is a piece of string? Do you know what I mean? It really is. And it sets you up for failure because you hope this will happen. You hope that. And if it doesn't, then, you know, how do you unpack that? How do you deal with it? Whereas, you know, I do quite like going to the wall of despair sometimes and sitting there, bawling my eyes out and then going, oh, I'm bored now. Let's just get on with it.
I think, well, in some ways, I think that's healthier. Like, I think there's also something about so I had a joke. I had one joke, JoJo. No, I haven't. I had one of the jokes that it always got a good laugh, but it wasn't my cleverest joke. But there you go. It was that for me, comedy is a way of finding light in the darkness. And when I get depressed, my thoughts go to pretty dark places, so it's really vital to seek out the light, and that is why I think that moths suffer from clinical depression. Now, thank you. Oh, it's very nice to get that validation from my comedy mum. But while I love that joke, what I've been thinking about recently is that light in the darkness is all very well and good, but that might be denying the darkness. Maybe it's important to look into the darkness, look into the shadows and see what is there, why is there that darkness, and not just shine a fucking light in there to deny that the darkness was there in the first place, but get to know the darkness and let's stop being poetic, Juliet, because it can hide behind poetry. Let's look at some of those repressed memories and let's explore why it is that I haven't quite moved on from the past. So that's part of what the process we're going through. Speaking about your past, though, JoJo, we've spoken so far about your childhood traumas of being born into a family that lived in a castle, and then your dad losing it all and having to move into a caravan, having a dad that then kind of just didn't he just go? He just went. He just avoided all responsibility.
Oh yes, he died with $750,000 in debt. Do you know what I mean?
There you go. That's the ultimate avoidance of responsibility, just dying. Ugh.
Who says you can't take it with you?
We've spoken about your brain hemorrhage, about your domestic violence, about your divorce from your first husband, and then you married his brother, and after being a single mum of children, being on income support, and then death of your parents, and then you've
another child. I had another child. I had a fourth one.
Another one.
At home because I didn't have time to get to hospital, so she dropped out on the bedroom floor.
I mean, again, childbirth is a physical trauma, and there's a lot of research being done at the moment into.
I do feel guilty as a woman, actually, because I give birth like I'm shelling peas. I really feel I'm not a sister when it comes to giving birth. I just don't have any of those horror stories of being in labour for 4 weeks. I'm just like, oh, there's another one.
Shooting it out like a log flume. Wonderful. Well, but then speaking of your children,
Yes.
and still with that beautiful image in our head, you have done a show recently that's won awards, and
it managed to win the Scottish Comedy Award Best Solo Show in 2020, which is quite an achievement given that there was fuck all happening in 2020.
Well, I saw it in 2019, and I think it was the last show that I saw that Edinburgh Fringe, and I had to beg, borrow, or steal to get a ticket because it was so popular. And I saw why. You were also, weren't you? You were definitely in the same room as me at the Gilded Blue.
I was on after you, wasn't I?
No, I was on after
you. Before
that
you
was No, I think you were after me because we got to have a little cuddle every day, and then I had to run away to cry or to celebrate, depending on how the show went. And I got a little cuddle with you, and then never got to see your show because I was packing down from my show. And when I say packing down, let's face it, having a drink. But can you tell us about that show? What was it called first, and can you give us your little spiel about it?
It was called Riches to Rags, so it did very much touch on what I've said about growing up in a castle, sort of starting at the top, steadily working my way down, that my life hadn't up until a certain point panned out the way that I'd kind of been led to believe it would, but in retrospect, and with brain hemorrhage and marriage and children, that I, through all that experience, that, I was out the other side, and, and I was happy with the way I was living, and things were getting better and going well. And that partly the class system in this country and partly the way the world works. But my son, in 2009, he joined the Royal Navy. So, as a mum, he was 17, he went off to the Navy. I still had the girls at home, happily married to Monk, and he loved it. He's, a beautiful young man, joined the military, and most people who know anything about the military, it's quite we're asking them to protect us, and sometimes we have to turn a blind eye to what we're actually asking these young men and women to do. And as a result, the military is a very insular. It's very, if you want to train someone to kill, you basically need to program them. And so the training that they did, I remember when he first did training, it's quite intense, and it's there's a lot of games, and they lark about, and there's a lot of stuff in the mess. And he'd tell me some of these horror stories about the sort of the mess deck games of somebody having their arse super glued together, or their pubes being put into someone's tea. There's a game called Freckles where you shit on a plate and then you bang the table, and then whoever gets the most freckles on their face has to buy the mess drinks.
Oh.
And it was absolutely hideous. Toby Tig, where you put your cock on someone's face when they're asleep and you don't want to wake them up. So all this stuff, which we kind of know, do you know what I mean? The military is rife with these kind of games. Whether you condone them or not condone them, that is kind of the expectation, to be done to or do to. And if you're not part of it, and because you're always reinventing yourself in the Navy, that you do kind of... you get moved every couple of years and moved on different ships. But anyway, so I'd hear all these lurid tales from my son. And the show really was what happened. It was a kind of a lead up to who I was, where I came from, the fact that I was a comedian and the things that I dealt with. But that in 2015, my son played a prank on a ship, and it was about... The show is about how we use humor and what we think is funny. Do you know what I mean? And we do think, people slipping on banana skins is funny, and things happening to other people, but also the acceptance of some behavior. Anyway, my son played a prank on a ship, which, I've seen the video. I don't necessarily approve. I can see exactly how it came about, and it was a laugh, and it was kind of expected of him, really, to behave like that. It was the behaviour that the military very much instills into you, to be, well, this, kind of whole advertising, be the best and all this kind of stuff. But yes, so he played a prank, which subsequently resulted in him being court-martialed 2 years afterwards. 2 years afterwards. And we always just thought, this is ridiculous. It's not going to come. It's a prank. It's a stupid joke. And, that's how he behaves because you taught him to behave like that. However, fast forward 2 years, and my son got, so what he done, he basically, well, I'm going to put a bottle up, this boy's bum, and he doesn't. It goes between his bum and cheeks, and they all laugh. Fast forward 18 months, they court-martial him. They find him guilty of sexual assault. They jail him for 5 years, and they put him on the sex offenders register for life. Now, I can accept that if they hadn't lied, and if I know that they absolutely lied. They used my son as a scapegoat. And I can't help but think, and I say this in the show, if I still lived in a castle, would my son have gone to prison?
Mm.
And I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer, but I can pretty much guess. They thought he was some working class jock lad that they could hold up as an example because they're under pressure from, to change the way that the military behaves, which I get, absolutely. If you really want to have this, squeaky clean military that, behaves and, doesn't do anything wrong, then fine. But they're not. That's not. They're lying. Everything like that still goes on to this day. And the idea that we were in a court case where his defense and the defense of everyone was, this happens all the time. And I was just kind of doing what was expected to remain. That they said, well, we've never heard the like. He's just one bad apple in a bowl of fruit. And yeah, I tried every avenue, and we had the lawyers from, Free Grant for Nothing, Michael Mansfield, who the lawyer from there, the Hillsborough disaster, and got justice for the 96, and they just couldn't unpick it. It was so tied up. But the only way, after exploring every single avenue, was to do it creatively. And it was that thing of going, they should have checked who the mother was. But the biggest thing for me coming out of that, Julia, was genuinely, I have never felt fear like it. So watching, and it still makes me cry, watching my son being taken off. He was in a civilian prison. He wasn't in a military prison. Watching my son being taken and being absolutely powerless to do. I've never felt fear like that in my life. And it puts everything into perspective. The love that you have for your children, what you'll do to fight for them. But I hate injustice, and I will keep going. That show, it got 5 stars. There were some people that had an issue with it. I couldn't give a fuck. This story will be told, and I will continue to tell it until the insidious corruption, lying, institutionalized bullies that allowed my son to take the rap for something that, and funnily enough, amount of texts I got recently about Vigil, like watch Vigil, like, yeah, they're just liars, and they can probably come and shoot me if I end up dead. I don't care. But what I did discover with that is that was the darkest time I've ever been through, and Rory and I went through it together, and bizarrely we came out the other end so much stronger. I look back on it now and I think, God, if he had stayed in the Navy, maybe he would have become someone I wouldn't have liked very much, because it is that really laddish behaviour. I think we have to be less naive about the fact if we want to have an effective military, then we have to accept that kind of really laddish or bullish behaviour is part and parcel of toughening them up. I don't know what it is, but my son is not, my point in the show was, if you're going to jail my son, fine, jail my son, 100%. I'm not condoning his behaviour. If you're going to jail him for that, you need to jail the entire Her Majesty's services. The Army, the Navy, and the RAF all need to be in prison for that behaviour. You don't take my son and use him as a scapegoat and as a way to go, oh yes, no, we're dealing with this behaviour in the military. No, you're not, you're liars. And so, yeah, and so the show was about that. It was about just, again, a bit like the brain hemorrhage. I said in the show that I always thought I was scared of dying, and I'm not scared of dying, I'm scared of not living, and that my son's life was put on hold, and then we hit the pandemic and everybody's lives was put on hold, and I just thought, bloody hell, do you know what I mean? It's all been, but yeah.
Yeah, Jojo, I mean, there's so much that we're going to, that I want to ask in light of that. Firstly, I want to thank you for sharing that so openly. I know that you've done shows about it, but it's one thing doing a show with lights and a microphone, and another thing to tell
also,
me.
I mean, again, I'm too trusting sometimes. I know this is on a live stream. I have no idea who's watching it. Somebody might get and go, oh, well, he deserves everything he gets. And you are absolutely entitled to that opinion. But that's the other thing I will say is my son has done his time. I mean, he has paid a fucking heavy price for a prank. And you can call him, but he's on the sex offenders register. If he, if I just said to you now, Juliet, oh, my son's on the sex offenders register, you wouldn't think he played a prank in the military. You'd think he'd raped a woman or fucked a kid. And the stigma attached to that, they tried to ruin his life. And they didn't, because he has incredible friends and we have an incredible family. But that, and I feel bulletproof. Anyone can say whatever the hell they like, because people that mind don't matter, and people that matter don't mind.
Well, firstly, it's an amazing lesson for anyone who is watching that to not judge on the label. There's nothing about labels that tell you who the person is or what the circumstances are of their lives. Secondly, to reassure you, Jojo, we've got an amazing Twitch producer, Alex Watson, who has put in all of the measures possible to mean that we only have lovely people watching. And I don't know how she's done that, but it's magic. To make sure that we only have the best, the creme de la creme of open-minded, open-hearted people. So, Jojo, you've mentioned a few things there that I want to come back to. We're coming up to, we've already done an hour, and just at this point, my lovely viewers, shocking that it's flown by, hasn't it? You and I could chat for ages, but for anyone who's watching, we normally do these streams for an hour. With Jojo, we've still got so much to cover that because there's just so much to bond over that we're going to go on for a little bit longer. And I think we'll manage our own energy levels. We'll manage Jojo's energy levels. I'll manage mine. Jojo will.
I'll have another
and anyone who needs to hop on or hop off, please go for it. In terms of viewers, if you want to get involved with some emotes, then there's a special Hopepunk emote that you can use if you become a subscriber to the Twitch stream channel, and then you get to use the really cool Hopepunk emote that Alex Watson has created for us. So please do that, and also if you just want to follow rather than subscribe, that's totally cool too. We also have a Discord channel where if you want to join us on Discord, then we have loads of information about JoJo, all of her social media channels as well that you can follow her on, and lots of information on books, podcasts, websites, charities that you can turn to if you're struggling with your mental health and specifically trauma as well, and trauma recovery, because there's no point in doing all of this research if we're not giving you the tools to have a proactive, healthy journey which leads towards a time that maybe you're mentally healthier than you might currently feel. So Jojo, you mentioned there about just actually, I've made a note saying ask Jojo for her social media details. So just right now, before we go over the hour, what is your social media following details? We're not finishing just yet, but
everything is JoJo Sutherland. Oh, I think lovely stream element. Yeah, it's JoJo Sutherland. Everything: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. JoJo Sutherland comedian
yes.
On Facebook. JoJo Sutherland on Twitter and JoJo Sutherland on Instagram.
So stream elements is Alex Watson. So Alex has just done that wonderful thing there. Yeah, you spoke about the darkest times, Jojo, and that you and Rory came out stronger. I wonder what that process is. Why is it that people, that it's a throwaway adage for some people, but you've really lived it, not just once, but a number of different times, where I feel like the word resilience has been thrown around so much, and I've been asked to do talks about resilience, and if anything, I feel like this year has proved to me that I don't know what resilience is. I've got no idea, but you keep going because the alternative, you kind of know
the alternative, that is it. And I did separate with my husband during lockdown, and that's for all various reasons, and we're still very much a family, and we still, and I still love him very much. But it is that thing where, I've got to an age where I think so much has happened that it is that thing of going, I've looked after everyone else. I've brought up 4 kids. I've been married twice. My role as a mother, my role as a sibling, my role that has always been an expectation to behave a certain way has changed. And I think all these experiences now have led me to go, oh, I'm going to look after me. It's my time. And you say that, and people accept it. My kids are fucking brilliant. My family, not so much. They freaked out a little bit. My brothers and sisters, because I did kind of flounce out the family WhatsApp group going, do you know what, fuck off. Because they didn't really understand what had happened with my career over lockdown, and that I felt the rug had been taken from under me. And they desperately love me. I know they do, but they just didn't get it. And I just thought, I haven't got time. I haven't got time for people that expect me to always be there for them or always be the jolly one. And it's not that I'm not jolly, but yeah, I've given up some of my roles, and my role at the moment is having a fucking great time, looking after myself, being with people that don't lecture me. Not that people do, but you know what I mean? I'm like, I haven't got time. I haven't got time to fuck about making everybody else's world better. I still do, of course I do, because I love making people better. But yeah, it's a bit of me time now.
Yes, I mean, we were going. I wanted to come back to the pandemic, and you've very awesomely led me into it. So there's a couple of things that I will come back to about scapegoats and institutionalization and secrecy, but we'll pause on that for a sec. The pandemic, Jojo. Yeah. Now, you and I had our chats on Saturday morning ahead of this stream about how we really were doing. And we've both got our long list of traumas on that trauma graph that we mentioned earlier. And that's all well and good, and we've lived through it and we've learned through it. And you mentioned there that you felt like you'd gotten through a lot, and your career was on a high, and your relationships were going quite well, and then the pandemic hit. And for me, in following in your footsteps, for me it was that I had an incredible partner who I loved more than I'd ever loved anybody. And my second Arts Council funded tour was underway, and we were on the 3rd date, and I was looking at my projected income for the first time ever working in the arts, and thinking, I've actually got a career that's paying, and I can see a trajectory, and I'm living in London, which I've always wanted to live in, and this is, things are going great. I've got amazing friends. I've got a great team around me. I've an agent and producer and all these great things. And then the pandemic. And for our industry, all of my gigs got completely cancelled. Firstly, they were pushed back and then repeatedly cancelled with further lockdowns. We had live events for like corporate gigs completely cancelled and not re-uptaken. That's not a word.
I know.
Rearranged. And then friendships, really hard to maintain when everyone's in a different situation and perhaps struggling in their own circumstances to even try to comprehend what it's like for our industry. And then the government it's the last sector to have any support, and not really comedy, like specifically arts organizations, and only specific organizations and not individuals. And that trauma, that societal trauma that we all struggled with. And again, we said earlier, it wasn't a competition of like how worse the trauma was for you or not.
Absolutely.
But then here I am saying the arts had it worse and comedy had it worse out of the arts. And it's hard to connect with other people who are also going through their own uncertainty and fear and anger about this situation. And at the same time, who can you really direct your anger to? Because it's a health trauma. It's not like it was caused. So
there's nobody to blame.
So JoJo, this trauma, societal trauma of the pandemic, we're still kind of in it, even though we're living in a post-vaccine world, because if we're talking about likening it to some of our personal younger traumas that younger aged traumas that we experienced at a younger age, is what I'm trying to say. If we compare this to that, then we're still processing this, we can't make sense of it until you get some distance from it, can you?
I think yes and no. And again, the woe is me kind of aspect. But after the whole thing with Rory and coming out the other side and building a life, and it was great. And, and I did the show and everything was just looking magical. And, I felt really comfortable with who I was and everything around me, to then have, like you say, this rug brought from under me. And it really was, I went right back to what the actual fuck. Have I not, I didn't need to learn anything about myself, or, I genuinely was like, I don't need this. And I did actually say that to my brother. It's like, everything that's happened in my life up until this point, I've dealt with it and I've come out the other side. Are you shitting me that I have to now do, finally getting out of debt, my career, my relationships were in a good place, my kids were all fine, I everything was great. And you go, what on earth have I done to deserve this? Which is a very stupid thing to say. And I did kind of go, I really, I don't need my character built any fucking more, thank you. And then turns out I did. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the pandemic, as much as it stripped away all the things that I thought were going to make my life better, two things happened. One, because of what had happened to my son, and he was 17 when he joined the Navy, and my youngest, she was only 2. They never lived together as children, so he was only ever a visiting brother. That their relationship was, they loved each other, but was different from the ones that he had with his other sisters, because they'd grown up together and they had much more history. And there was a sense of resentment with my youngest, quite rightly, because when Rory went to prison, she lost me overnight. I just threw everything into Rory. So when lockdown happened, they were both at home. And the first few days, I thought, we're not going to get through 3 weeks. Remember that, 3 weeks? Because they fight like cat and dog. They don't have any respect for each other. She didn't really have very much respect for him. And I don't know what happened, because they started sort of staying up all night and sleeping all day, and Monk and I were going to bed at night and getting up. But somewhere in that, Julia, they fixed it. They sorted whatever it was. The fact that they were forced to be in each other's company and could not escape the relationship that those two kids have now with each other, it blows my mind. It's absolutely beautiful. The love and joy that they have with each other, which I think there are no other circumstances under which I think that could happen, or could have happened, that they would have been forced to sort whatever their issues were. So that is absolutely brilliant. And I have learned that, you know, I thought I was a social butterfly. I thought, you know, I needed to be out and about and always I needed the company of others to make me feel better about myself. And I've learned I don't. I actually do like my own company. I do enjoy being on my own. And that's not in a bad way, but because then my relationship broke down, and then I've got a lodger staying with another comic, and he's fabulous. And he did say to me, and we joke, and he'd said, "What are you up to today?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to have a cup of tea, a bit of toast, and then I'm going to hang myself in the bathroom." And he just said, "Why are you bothering with the toast?" And I thought, and you know what? It was just a moment of clarity, of just going, there are people that I love, there's people that I like, there's people that I don't like, there's, you know, and I stripped everything back, and and it sounds selfish, but I know it's not. It's just about me now and the people that I genuinely care about. And there's nothing, I can't live to other people's standards. I can only live in the world that I live in. And so as far as COVID's concerned, or authority, my dad always used to have this, never assume because someone's in a position of authority that they know what the fuck they're talking about. And some people are cunts. And it's having that real strength of my own mortality, my genuine knowing what is important, what isn't important. You know, I was really faced with some, not backlash, but yeah, some people judged Rory and judged me by default, and I don't care. I know who's important, and I know who I care about and what I care about, and I'm just getting on with my life without hassling anyone else, but having a bloody good time. Just a bloody good time.
I'm really happy to hear that. I also identify again, this therapy that I'm going through at the moment, we discussed on Saturday the fact that it's like if I'm processing the repressed emotions about each of these different traumas, then I'm finding underneath it who the most authentic version of me is and who was buried underneath it. And one of the things I'm trying to focus on at the moment is learning to be alone and enjoy my company and self-soothe and not look for external validation and be my own validation, be my own best company, my own parent, my own friend, maybe not my own lover. I'm not quite there yet, but
no, nothing beats a good wank. Come on.
Got to throw that in there. We've covered brain hemorrhages, we've covered divorce, we've covered sex offenders register. We've got to throw wanking in there as well. The other trauma that we all know, le petit mort.
I think so many people these days, there's this sort of element of, you know, people say what they think's the right thing to say, and I can't be bothered. I just, do you know what I mean? And it's not that take me as you find me, and you know, of course I still have huge empathy and sympathy for other people, but I just think it's just easier to be your authentic self, to be honest. I'm done with disingenuous, and I'm done with hypocrisy. I'm done with facilitating bullshit. And yeah, I'm very lucky to have a lot of people around me, yours very self-included, that love me. And you know what? I love me too.
I've got a few more questions I want to ask, and I don't want to go over 9 o'clock, but and that would have been a great time, a great moment to be like, oh, we all love JoJo. Of course, we all love JoJo. Anyone who's watching, by the way, do show JoJo some love by following her on all of her socials, and do show her some love in the chat right now, and show each other some love. Show yourself some love. Maybe, I mean, I'm not trying to encourage you to wank whilst you're watching this. Please don't. That's the wrong thing.
We're going to hopefully do a tour next year where it's none of it's trauma. It's just absolute. A woman 55 starting out in the world again. Do you know what I mean?
it's going well. We're still researching a show for the Arts Council about trauma, so just pausing on a couple of things before we wrap up by 9. The pandemic, I mean, I was tempted to say it almost sounds like you're grateful to the pandemic for giving you...
not. It can get in the bin.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll give it a couple of yeah, fair enough. That was some good that came out of it. But no, it was, and I think it is still worldwide, that sense of just nothing really tangible to hang on to. Everything feels so uncertain. I mean, it goes from 3 weeks to flatten to the curve to, stopping people from dying. Now it's stopping people from getting ill. Now it's, now the planet's about to burn off its hinges. And I've just had to remove myself from the noise and the fear because it is hysteria. And again, if people are scared and I understand it, I just can't be part of it. So I'm literally trying to live with as minimal interference from everything and everyone as I can. And it's bloody working.
I think for me, I hadn't realized how introverted I actually was until I started doing this work on myself. And I think, again, coming off social media and kind of going cold turkey on that, and it made me realize that being fully present is something that it takes practice, and it takes some focus to be able to really be in the moment, not be in the past, and not be dissociating. So social media is a great way to dissociate, or dissociating just mentally, or through using substances. There's lots of ways that we can healthily dissociate. Sometimes, but as long as it's not like a constant unhealthy thing that doesn't help you process it.
No, absolutely.
But you touched on a really important word that because I've been trying to see the similarities and the differences between the traumas of like the actual post-traumatic stress disorder or complex post-traumatic stress disorder traumas that people can go through versus the societal trauma of the pandemic. And there's a similar process of grief that goes through the recovery process from it. And I think that we as a society will probably be going through the depression, anger, denial, bargaining, before we get to acceptance. That is all of the stages of grief for anyone who's not familiar with them. But not my hand. That's the number 5 was what I was trying to say. High five. But the other thing is uncertainty. You mentioned how uncertain things have been, and I'm very curious about this at the moment, because I've realized how many tricks I play on my own mind with my thought processes to try to imagine some kind of certainty, or reach out, clutching for certainty, inventing certainty with wishful thinking, or through self-sabotaging behaviors, or anything that means that I can live in some kind of a even false certainty is reassuring. And it's more reassuring than living for me, than living in an uncertain world. However, that is the realistic world. That is the world we live in. There is no such thing as certainty in any aspect of our lives. So how do you deal with uncertainty, JoJo?
It comes back to humor, and it comes back to what I said right at the beginning, that, that fear leads to that feeling and that vulnerability of not being in control. And when you feel that something's out with your control, it can control you. That if you can find a way to laugh at it, and like I say, hang myself in the bathroom, why are you bothering with the toast? I'm literally talking about killing myself. And as much as I didn't really mean it, there was a bit of me was going, do you know what? Actually, but I know I wouldn't. But it felt right to say it, and that immediate puncture from Joe with a humorous retort just lightened it, and it just made it better, and it just went, well, no, I won't bother then. Do you know what I mean? And I think, when you can go to those dark places that we said, go to the wall of despair, allow yourself to do it, allow yourself to be in that, because I think that's what we're scared of. We're scared of going there because we don't want to be unhappy. We don't want to be miserable. We don't want to be depressed. But I think if you allow it to happen rather than resist it, I think embrace it, but somewhere along the line, don't take yourself too seriously and find the humor, that is a way out to the light that you talk about.
Well, this is interesting because I completely agree with you. And I'm also asking myself the question of this role that we play as comedians, and the role that comedy and humor can play can be helpful. But I've also noticed in myself recently, having done this work and started to emerge back out to socialize, that I'm asking myself the question of when is it appropriate for me, you know, read the room internally rather than externally. And I think this is a new boundary for me. So, for example, after we chatted on Saturday, I went to a Halloween party that evening, which felt quite new, navigating this internal world and meeting people, and having learned a lot about boundaries and learned a lot about well, just so much codependency, attachment disorder, how much I caretake in conversations. And there was one moment where I was chatting to this person I just met, and I said, oh, so he just moved into the place that we were, and I said, so where were you before? And he said, oh, I don't mean to make this awkward, but I've just moved out of my the flat that I shared with my girlfriend. In fact, I picked up the boxes this morning. And he said, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to make the conversation awkward. And I said, don't worry, I'm the queen of awkward. Whatever you say, I'll top the awkwardness. And you know me quite well, Jojo. Up till now, that might have been what I would have done. Like he then said, you know, well, go for it. And I was thinking in my head, well, I could bring up the being sectioned on the Mental Health Act, the childhood stuff. I could bring up the going from a size 4 to a size 20. I could talk about being engaged and then ending it. I could talk about, just let's not list them all now because we don't have time, Jojo. But I could do that, or I could just be present and ask him questions about himself. And I don't play that role anymore. I've got boundaries. Those things don't define who I am. And in this social setting, I'd rather not play that role.
Absolutely. And actually, in some ways, it's a better role because I think it's more helpful, for your own mental health, not to go, oh, you know, but because you can, like you say, ask questions, you can have empathy, you can have sympathy, you can have recognition, which is the same in comedy. There's a resonance. So somebody knows if you're being authentic with them, but rather than reflecting it back, going, yes, I know how you feel like that because this happened to me. Just stay present with the person that you're with and let them, and know that you can actually help because you've got experience in that area without actually revealing all your trauma. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And in some ways, I find that is such a fucking great way to fill my battery because I go, oh, I understood what they were talking about, and I was able to, you know, give some advice or, you know, say something helpful that made them feel better without them having to go, oh shit, sorry, I didn't realize you'd gone through that as well. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think there's a couple of, because I used to pride myself on asking people questions in conversations, but the difference here was that I recognized that if I were to play the queen of awkward, that would be caretaking to make him feel less awkward, whereas he didn't have any reason to feel awkward. But he could just feel awkward. If he needs to feel awkward, that's okay. It wasn't up to me to reassure him. That's codependent. Yeah. So I was putting in a boundary of but instead I can ask him questions. I can if he asks for advice, I can offer some, but I'll learn more about me and about the world if I'm present and asking him how he's doing. So instead, because it sounded like it was a rough day for him, I asked him questions about how it had been for him, and without making assumptions or value judgments. And it was a very different way of being me, and it's revealing a different aspect of me. So who knows who's going to get on stage when I next do.
That's the fun, that's the beauty. But it is that, I think, and it is like you're saying about the roles. And you know, with my brothers and sisters, I'm the youngest. They always expect me. I'm always resilient. And I think a lot of my friends were worried about me through the pandemic because I wasn't being resilient. I really didn't cope. And that for them, and same with my kids and with Monk, they were just like, well, if you're not coping, what the fuck do we do? Because the expectation that Mum always has the answer, or oh, Jojo will make it all happy again. And I just walked away from that role. I'm like, nah, you fucking sort yourselves out. I mean,
it's really important. If you reach a limit sometimes in a relationship, you've got to put in that boundary of I have the right to walk away. And that's the right thing to do if that relationship isn't serving you in whatever way.
Well, it's just taking more of a balance and more of a, you know, it's that not sort of being seen to be doing the right thing all the time. Because sometimes you go, I don't want to. And there'll be other people. Do you know what I mean? It's like I think there are different people for you at different things. Do you know what I mean? And I look at my friendship group and I go, actually, we all play different roles, and you know, you rely on one friend to go and get pissed with, or another one to have a moan at, or do you know what I mean? And yeah, and I think it's rather than trying to always be the one that has the solutions and all, you kind of go, well, nah. Okay.
Yeah, I really want to carry on chatting with you, but we're coming up to 9 o'clock. And I just want to quickly say that the roles that we play for each other and the roles that we play for ourselves, I think especially during the pandemic, they kind of we ran the risk of trapping ourselves within them, and I think that for me that led to my burnout, because I was constantly chasing around for being what I was before the pandemic, and I can't ever be that ever again. So you're discovering who you are now in this new era of your life. I'm hopefully discovering who I am as well, and I hope that whoever we're both going to become will be able to meet up to have a big cuddle.
Absolutely, and just keep making people laugh, but more importantly, make yourself laugh.
Absolutely. Jojo, we are both getting to know ourselves. If anyone wants to get to know you more via Healthy Boundaries social media, where can they go?
They can go to Instagram, JoJo Sutherland, Twitter, JoJo Sutherland, or JoJo Sutherland comedian on Facebook.
And that is on your screens right now as well. Jojo, you have been incredible, and thank you so much for joining me. And I can't wait to see you in flesh soon. And thank you so much to Alex Watson, our amazing Twitch producer. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Thank you to the Arts Council for funding this research and development. Thank you also to our general producer, Susanna, who I don't know if she's still watching at the moment, but thank you to everybody involved. Guys, if you want to subscribe to this Twitch stream, please do. You'll be able to then have access to some emotes, Hopepunk emotes. And if you want to follow me on social media, you totally can. I'm just not on there very much at the moment. If you want to become a Patreon supporter, I am still posting occasionally on Patreon with updates, behind the scenes updates, and there's different levels of support that you can offer on a monthly basis. So it's totally up to you what level you want to join in on. We are going to be back, I believe it's Thursday, and we're going to be back during the daytime next. Now, what time is it on Thursday? Alex, if you have any idea what time it is it 10 a.m. on Thursday? 10:30? Something like that. We're going to be talking to Georgie Morell, who is an amazing comedian as well, and she's going to be talking to me about the traumas that she's been through, losing her sight when she was in her 20s, and then going into comedy as a result. Turns out it's a really common way to deal with trauma. Noon on Thursday, apparently. No, not noon. It's not noon because I'm going to restorative yoga at noon. Which is a part of my somatic healing. I think it's 10:30. I know, it's ridiculous. Who am I? I go to meditation classes, I go to yoga classes just to try to feel okay. Okay, we need to update the calendar. That's fine, Alex. We're going to raid, with anyone who's left, we're going to raid the amazing John Robertson. So if you want to go over to his channel, he's an amazing chap, and say hi from Jojo and from me to John. And thank you once again to Jojo. Thank you for everyone watching. And Alex, can we set up a little raid? Are we ready to go for the raid? Hopefully Alex is doing that right now. I'm sure. I'm just going to keep
talking Latin to me now. I don't know what you're talking about reading.
I mean, nihil carborundum illegitimi. That's the only Latin that I can remember from doing Latin GCSE.
Is that Latin for read?
Yeah, that is Latin for raid the bastards. Yeah, we are going to raid. Alex, are we good to raid? Oh, I've had a little message from Alex. Yeah, go for it, Alex. Let's raid now. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Thank you. Bye.